At midnight on the 30th of June this year, Britain will return Hong Kong to Chinese rule. It will be the end of a very long relationship. Joining me in the studio to look back on Britain's relationship with Hong Kong in the countdown to the handover is Henry Tang, one of the BBC's specialists on the Far East. Henry, how did the relationship between Britain and Hong Kong come about in the first place?
Initially, I'd have to say it was a relationship based on exploitation. The British in the 1830s insisted on selling opium to a willing Chinese market in southern China. And by 1841, the Chinese authorities were getting more and more fed up with this. The Chinese took the action of throwing the British traders out from the port of Macau. British traders, led by the Hong Kong-based families, Jardine Matheson, put parliamentary pressure on the British government, and they got the British Navy to weigh in with gunships and to literally bombard the Chinese into submission. As a result, the Chinese, to appease the British, allowed opium to be sold, and they ceded up in perpetuity the small island of Hong Kong.
In 1984, the British and Chinese governments signed a joint declaration agreeing to return Hong Kong to China in 1997. Margaret Thatcher was the British Prime Minister at that time.
We are privileged today to take part with our Chinese friends in a unique occasion. The circumstances are unique. The agreement is unique. It is right that we should feel a sense of history, of pride, and of confidence in the future.
Henry, what was the future for Hong Kong under the terms of the joint declaration?
For the next 50 years, the future of Hong Kong should be very much the present. The Chinese agreed in 1984 to maintain for 50 years a formula which they called one country, two systems. Now, that was the basic political framework. The trouble was that the details were not agreed. It was agreed in 1984 that Hong Kong's Parliament, the Legislative Council, would be kept in the future administration after 1997. But details such as how many members of the council would be directly elected were not agreed. And arguments over issues such as that have been at the foundation of the bad feeling between Beijing and London so far.
The last ever British governor of Hong Kong is Christopher Patten. When he was appointed in 1992, he said there would be challenges to overcome before the handover.
We will inevitably, in the next 5 years, have many difficult challenges and difficult problems to overcome together. I have no doubt at all that I'll be judged above all on how successfully I have helped to implement the joint declaration to ensure the stability, the prosperity and the way of life of Hong Kong.
Chris Patten said he would be judged on how effectively he had managed to ensure Hong Kong's way of life. How effective has he been?
He's been effective in realising that the best way to manage Hong Kong, from his point of view, would be to manage it very little. Initially, he was unpopular because he was not what's called a China hand. He wasn't somebody from the British Foreign Office who had spent most of his working life studying the Chinese language. And he was seen as a political appointee who would take political decisions which inevitably would upset Beijing. And that was indeed the initial impression he made. He insisted on the formula of directly electing 1/3 of the Legislative Council. That was not agreed by Beijing. They did not like that. But recently, he has taken a step back by gradually using more local Chinese within his administration. I think Patten has succeeded in ensuring some political and administrative continuity after July the 1st this year.
So you think history will judge him kindly?
I think it will judge him kindly. It won't judge him as the man who soured relations dreadfully between China and Britain. I think the main judgment obviously will depend on how the Chinese handle Hong Kong and the life of Hong Kong citizens after July the 1st.
Well, the handover happens at midnight on the 30th of June. Do we have any idea what the immediate results will be?
Yes, well, the immediate result will be a lot more Chinese troops. The British garrison withdraws with the taking down of the British flag on the midnight of the 30th. But interestingly, the main celebration of the handover from the Chinese point of view will take place one day after the British farewell. The Chinese President Jiang Zemin is expected to fly into Hong Kong on July the 1st after Chris Patten has left, and he will oversee what we are told will be a military celebration. We're expecting eventually to see 9,000 Chinese troops take over the running of Hong Kong from their British counterparts. At most, there were 9,000 British troops who manned the garrison in Hong Kong, so there should be a straight swap, as it were. If the Chinese bring in more, and they have a more heavy-handed presence, then obviously that will send less than encouraging signals to the majority of Hong Kong citizens. But initially, I think with the Chinese flying in on what will be a great deal of goodwill and optimism from Hong Kong citizens, we should see quite a smooth handover initially.
And how do you see the future of Hong Kong in the long term?
In the long term, freedoms will perhaps get restricted. Already, we've seen the Chinese saying that they want to bring in laws which will reduce the freedom of political parties to gather and to protest in public after the handover. So we will see a general tightening of the political climate. There won't be so much freedom for people to express opinion, but they will still be allowed to work and to make money in whatever way they can, as they do now.
Henry Tang, thank you. That was Henry Tang, one of the BBC's specialists on the Far East.